Hi, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
So yeah, just as we wait for people to join for this webinar, at any point, if you guys have any questions or anything, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A section of the webinar, and we will, or Bryony and John will answer them at the end. But yeah, just a few more minutes before we start. Hey everyone, let's start. Yeah, welcome to this webinar on NEC contracts, but in particular on the soft skills needed to be a successful project manager. Yeah, a bit of housekeeping. If you do have any questions, as I've said before, feel free to drop it in the Q&A section that we've got. There's also a little chat function, I think, or you could use the Q&A section alternatively. If you have any sort of tech issues, then I'll be on hand in the backstage just to help with that. You can also upvote questions, I think, as well. So if there is a particular question that is the most pertinent, we'll probably start with that, but that'll be at the end. But yeah, without further ado, I'll leave you with John and Bryony, who will take you through the webinar. So yeah, thanks guys, and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Farhan.
Okay, Brian, do you
Start?
want to start? So, my name's John Sherry. I've got 37 years experience predominantly in water, but I have done international contracts. I've worked on nuclear, and I've worked in energy, waste to energy. My full-time role post-COVID is pretty much senior tutor for NEC. I became a member of their consultants panel in January this year. And generally, I find NEC contracts helpful. It's the people that operate them and end up working outside the contract that leads me to have to do deep dives and try and rescue the contract and the project. Over to you, Bryony.
Hello, so my name is Bryony. I work for a company called Holland, which is a behavioural consultancy. And we take applied behavioural science, which is understanding why people behave the way that they do. And we use this to improve leadership, efficiency and safety. You can see on the screen, there's a few different work streams that we offer at Holland. And you can see that we assist teams throughout a project's life cycle, from helping teams to win work, to set off a project with the right behaviours. We do get brought in for project recovery if things are not going so well. We usually do a discovery at that point, find out what's actually happening and how we can support leaders to improve that. We specialise in leadership training, and we're best known for our BMT, which is behavioural management techniques. And this is a blend of project management skills with behavioural science. And we help project managers understand the science behind why people behave the way they do, and also using that to influence and improve their workplace. This goes hand in hand with safety training, because if you can understand why people are behaving the way that they are, and you've got skills to influence behaviours and to increase the behaviours that you want to see, then it's more likely that you're going to get those safe behaviours that you want to see. We also provide coaching for leaders any stage of a project, or whether they're working on a project or not, helping them to understand how they can improve their performance.
So during today, we're going to describe the philosophy of the new engineering contract, and we're concentrating on the ECC, the engineering and construction contract. We're going to explain what collaboration is, and we're going to look at it from a psychological perspective, and then we're going to look at it under the contract. How does the contract support us in collaboration, and what are the consequences if we don't cooperate? Next slide, Brian. So, NEC contracts were first published in 1993 to facilitate and encourage good management of risk using clear and simple language and appropriate risk allocation. The base contract, as it's written and published, shares risks fairly between the client and the contractor. Most clients and their lawyers, though, cannot resist making client-specific amendments or Z clauses, and these tend to detract from mutual trust and cooperation. So mutual trust and cooperation is embedded in clause 10.2, and when the contracts were produced, the aim was to step away from business as usual. If we go back historically through the 80s and 90s, government contracts in particular tend to overspend and be late. Why? Because we tend to award a contract to the cheapest tier one that's made the biggest mistakes, so it's got the cheapest price. And then the very expensive construction management teams from the client and the contractor spend the rest of their time trying to either defend or recover commercial positions. Latham suggested in 1992 that if we could work collaboratively, and he published the Latham's report, Constructing the Team, Constructing Excellence. He believed that if we could work collaboratively on a project, that over 5 years the UK construction industry could see savings of over 30%. This would be billions that would be freed up for further capital investment projects. Okay, B? So, NEC4 was published on the 18th of June 2017. So, there have been new engineering contracts. This is the 33rd year. So, the NEC this time tried to standardize the format across the suite of contracts. The ECC is just one of the contracts. We have contracts for virtually any phase of the construction project, and we have new contracts such as the framework contract or the facilities management contract. Across the suite, we have the standard 9 sections, and in the facilities management and the term services and the professional services, we introduced a client rep, the equivalent of the PM in the ECC, to manage the service for the client. We've used standard common industry terms. So we've got rid of works information and changed it to scope. Scope describes the works and any constraints. Next slide, B. So, the ethos of the NEC and the first change from NEC 3 to 4 can be encapsulated in clause 10.1. The parties, the client and the contractor, the client's representatives, the project manager and the supervisor all act as stated. NEC contracts are detailed processes and procedures that tell us what and when and who has to do things. 10.1 has been split from 10.2, which was previously incorporated, where the parties, the project manager and the supervisor have an express obligation to proceed in mutual trust and cooperation, a good faith requirement. Next slide, B. So 10.2, if you're the PM or the supervisor, is legally enforceable. The most recent court case we've got is Van Ord versus Dragos. Van Ord, as part of the negotiations of their subcontract with Dragos to construct a new harbour up in Aberdeen, included a Z clause that said the only changes to their scope would reflect changes between the ultimate client and Dragos. It was an option B contract with a bill of quant. Van Ord priced for removing sands and silts and removing the granite at the same unit rate. Before the ink was dry on this contract, Dragos had gone out to the market and got cheap local prices, putting Van Ord into a loss-making position. Lord Woolman held that clause 10.2, mutual trust and cooperation, was not merely an avowal of an aspiration, but instead reflected and reinforced the principles of good faith in the contract. I've taken a slight liability as the Van Ord case was NEC3. The actual quote is 10.1, but it regards mutual trust and cooperation is a legally enforcing obligation on the PM and the supervisor to impartially apply the contract provisions. And we need to work together cooperatively to realise the full benefits of an NEC contract. Next slide, B.
Thank you. So it's my bit now. For those of you who didn't realise, I probably should have said this in my introduction, that this is my dad, John. And I normally don't bring my dad to work, but we saw this as a really good opportunity to bring together my dad's contractual expertise with my behavioural expertise. And hopefully throughout what I'm going to talk about next, you'll pick up some tips that you can take away and apply to your workplace and enhance your ability to apply the contract. So taking it back to basics, when we deliver behavioural training, we would define a behaviour as what a person says and or does. And this can sound a little bit simplistic, perhaps too simplistic, but this is really helpful to come at this from an objective perspective. The reason why a lot of organisations trip themselves up when they are trying to have a behavioural drive for these kind of projects is because they will describe behaviours that they want to see, like integrity or trust or honesty or even collaboration. But they're too vague and ambiguous, and they mean different things to different people. So it's really important to define the behaviours that you want to see, being really specific. And this is something that we can help people to do. But the key is to make sure that you've got something that is objective to start with. We define behaviour as being influenced by 3 key categories. This is your DNA, everything that's happened in your life so far, and your environment. And when we talk about the environment, we're not talking about this from a climate change or a sustainability perspective. This is about the room and the people in it. So every time that somebody walks out or somebody walks in, the environment has changed. So we choose to focus on the environment because this is something that everybody can influence. So those other 2 categories are really important, and they can be important to reflect upon and acknowledge. But the thing that everybody can change, everybody can influence, is the local environment. So it's really important for leaders to understand how they can do this. Behaviour can feel confusing, and it can become frustrating when there's a certain behaviour that you're trying to change, whether that's your own behaviour or somebody else's. This can cause an emotional response, which is not particularly helpful. But when you start to look at this from an objective perspective, utilising behavioural science, then things start to make a little bit more sense. We remove the guesswork, we remove the common sense approach, and we look at what's actually happening. Applying behavioural science to project management is extremely beneficial because it helps to understand what is actually happening, rather than guessing or being distracted by what you think should be happening. This helps projects to make sure that they're running on time, on budget, and safely. So I've already mentioned that a behaviour is what a person says or does. And before that behaviour happens, there will be some kind of prompt in the environment. If you're familiar with behavioural science, then you might have heard the term antecedent, but don't worry too much about that. I've tried to make my content today as accessible as possible, so hopefully it gives you a nice overview of the kind of work that we do. So the environment has got lots of prompts in it. That might be something from the contract, it might be a notice board, a sign, or somebody asking somebody to do something. So that's something that comes before the behaviour. Anything that happens as a result of the behaviour is a consequence, and this influences whether the behaviour is repeated. If the behaviour increases or is maintained, then we know that the behaviour has been reinforced. If the behaviour stops, then we know it has been punished. So it's really important to go back to that behavioural definition, what a person says or does, because if you've been specific enough with your definition of behaviour, you should have something that is measurable, so you'll be able to know whether it has been increased or whether that behaviour has been stopped, which is important for noticing the trends. Dad, did you want to add something here about the contract?
So under our contract, we said the first change from NEC3 to 4 is to split 10.1 following the rules from mutual trust and cooperation 10.2. There are numerous clauses in the contract where if the PM or the contractor fail to follow the rules, there are consequences. So if our contractor fails to submit the first compliant programme, no ifs, buts or maybes, the PM, in accordance with clause 50.5, withholds a cumulative 25%. If, once we've got our first programme and we've returned the 25% that's been retained, the contractor submits a non-compliant programme, then if a programme is not accepted for a reason stated in the contract, clause 64.1, bullet 4, the PM has to evaluate the time and cost implications of all compensation events. The contractor loses the entitlement to provide quotations to cover compensation events. Some things, such as failing to notify early warnings, can result in disallowed costs, 11.226 CD&E 11.227. So if you don't follow the contract, your commercial position is weakened, whether you are the PM or the contractor. Now, the compensation event process is very complex, but there are numerous steps where either the PM or the contractor can find their commercial position significantly weakened because they didn't follow the contract. Back to you, B.
Okay, so with that behavioural basics covered, I want to think about now what collaboration actually means. And I think it's important to reflect here on the fact that collaboration will mean different things to different people. That's inevitable. As I spoke about, organisations using what we would describe as a label, collaboration, it's important to think about the behaviours that contribute to collaboration and what that needs to look like on a project level, on a team level, perhaps even on an individual level. So first of all, I'm going to look at a Cambridge Dictionary definition. So the Cambridge Dictionary says that it is the situation of two or more people working together to create or achieve the same thing. Sounds fantastic. It's probably where we want to be with project management. The problem is that Cambridge Dictionary also says that it's the situation of people working with an enemy who has taken control of their country. Now, I can imagine that there's a few people on this webinar who've experienced projects that feel perhaps more like this than the initial definition. So hopefully there'll be things today that you can pick up on to take you to working together with a shared goal rather than working with an enemy. So it's all about perspective. The project manager for the client and the contractor's rep need to lead by example. They need to decide what those collaborative behaviours need to look like. How are they communicating? When are they communicating? And any behaviours that also need to contribute to that collaborative goal. One example I thought I would share came to mind. This was when I was preparing a lady for a collaborative interview, and we were trying to go through all the different examples that she had of collaboration and where it had worked well and how she'd played into that. And as a commercial manager, she had she shared an example where co-location had been really important for her to be able to collaborate. And she'd mentioned that there was an open book policy, and it was really important that both teams felt like they had access to all the information at all times and were involved during all of the key processes. The problem is that people can feel like they're in each other's pockets. The perspective is different for different people who've experienced co-location. I'm sure that many people on here today have experienced co-location and it's worked brilliantly and it's helped collaboration. And there's probably times when it hasn't worked very well, when 2 or more organisations have been lumped together in the same room and somebody's just hoped for the best and left everyone to it. This is not a strategy for collaboration. And this is a strategy that would be really helpful to improve collaboration. There needs to be a purposeful drive to uniting people and building relationships so that co-location works well. There was one example where Holland had supported a London Underground station upgrade, and we had facilitated a one-team approach by training all of the leaders in behavioural leadership. The leaders were equipped with the skills to make sure that co-location, as just one example, worked well to improve collaboration. So what does the NEC say about collaboration? It requires a change in mindset and behaviour, enjoyable working environment, engagement of all parties, and moving away from business as usual. So these all sound great. Just like I mentioned with the labels versus behaviours, we want to try and think about this from an objective perspective. So for a mindset and behaviour, if you were looking, people will often come to me and say, we've got a really bad culture at the moment and we want to change it. We want to change everyone's minds. I want everyone to feel empowered. It all sounds fantastic, but you need to think about what the specific behaviours are. And perhaps you've got no idea. In that case, it's a good idea to find out what's actually happening at the moment, perhaps a climate survey or some anonymous questions. There's plenty of different tools that you can use to get that information, but finding out what's actually happening is really important and an objective step in being able to figure out what's going on. Again, enjoyable working environment is going to mean different things to different people, depending on where you've worked, what your experience has been. People are going to feel comfortable sharing different things. So it's important to set some boundaries, set expectations, and understand how this is going to work for everybody. So what you can do instead, as I've already mentioned, thinking about what's actually happening, being very specific with what you actually want to see and hear, and then you can think about what the consequences currently are. I mentioned that this is anything that happens after a behaviour, and this is really powerful in terms of deciding whether that behaviour is going to be repeated or whether it's going to be stopped. Thinking about how you're going to measure this is really important to make sure that it's a sustainable thing. If you try to change something and you don't track it, you don't look at any of the data, then it's not going to be very clear whether you've been successful, whether you've improved collaboration, or whether you've perhaps added some obstacles that are hindering it. Avoiding common sense is really important, especially on projects where everybody has got completely different levels of experience. People have worked in different industries where there's perhaps been different practices. So it's really important to set clear expectations using very clear language. Collaboration is a leadership responsibility, and everybody has got a responsibility to influence this and a part to play. But it's important to start at the top. That example that I gave about co-location, if the leaders were in the staff room slagging the client off, then it's not going to improve collaboration. If they are talking about how this is helping improve collaboration, if they're demonstrating positive working relationships, if they are doing what they say they're going to do and building trust, that's going to help develop that culture of collaboration. We've mentioned working towards a shared goal. Leaders being able to articulate what that goal is really important, and it's even better if they can demonstrate how their team or even an individual is working towards that goal. This can help to keep people motivated, especially when they're working on quite monotonous or mundane tasks or quite complex, tricky tasks that are playing into a bigger project. Acknowledging the strengths of each person or team, or hopefully each organisation is working towards their own strengths, is important for collaboration to be successful and also sustainable. This is important to make sure that you are utilising the resource that you've got within your own team. Looking for opportunities for collaboration, and this point is around proactive risk mitigation and early warning notices, which my dad will talk about next.
So there are numerous collaboration clauses in the contract. NEC4's got X22, two-stage procurement, where we bring a contractor on board way earlier than you would normally do in the design phase. But good contracts start, or good projects, with clear, well-written contracts and a fair risk allocation. 25.1 requires the contractor to cooperate with others and share the working area. But as we've said, our contract has consequences if you don't cooperate and work in accordance with the rules. So contractor shows on each program submitted for acceptance to the PM, interfaces with the client and others. If the client and others don't work in accordance with the accepted program, we get compensation events under clause 60.1 brackets 3, 60.1 brackets 5. Go on, B.
So, some practical things. You can ask people what their strengths are, and this can be part of one-to-ones, and making sure that one-to-ones have got a structure, and asking people if there is anything that is getting in the way of them utilising their strengths, if there's anything that they need support with. Collecting data, and this can be simple. It can be utilising things that are already, data that's already being collected, but to understand behavioural trends, what is actually happening. Making changes to the environment. As I mentioned, this is the room and the people in it, and co-location is an obvious attempt to change the environment to improve collaboration, communication, various different things. But it's important for when a leader is wanting to change a behaviour, even making a subtle change in the environment, changing the office layout, can change people's behaviours. Doing something differently. I think it sounds almost too simple again to say if nothing changes, nothing changes. And people in behavioural science, there is a term called learned helplessness, which is basically when people submit to whatever is causing them pain, frustration, and they just accept that this is their situation, so they may as well put up with it. And this is really, really common. So it's important, if you notice this with yourself or somebody else, to notice that it's happening and to think about how you can change that. Perhaps having a conversation and just asking why somebody is doing something like that. Have they thought about different ways of doing that? Do they need some support to do that?
So another way that NEC4 tries to help collaboration. 13.2 has been tweaked, as has 13.4. 13 covers communication. 13.2 says that if our scope includes collaboration software, then that is the only mechanism under the contract for communicating. We all get bombarded with a series of emails, lots of different forms of communication. Putting one version of reality into the project software makes everybody's life easier. In 2002, when I started my NEC journey, there weren't plug-and-play software available for NEC contract administration. We spent £1.5 million taking Primavera's Expedition to use it for construction contracts. Why? Because we needed to know where we were on game pain on a program worth 1.5 billion. One of the advantages of collaboration software is one source of the truth. Also, most of the systems have a ball in court feature that starts to ensure that we don't miss the onerous timescales that are required to respond in NEC contracts. 13.4 is one of my favourite collaboration clauses in that if the project manager fails to accept a submission, whether that's a programme, design document or compensation event, the project manager now has to not just point to the contract doesn't comply with clause X, the PM now has to tell the contractor how to amend the submission to make it compliant. It avoids email ping pong and helps us all work more efficiently. Go on, B.
So communication is a key aspect of collaboration, and it's important to understand how this impacts collaboration. A lot of the time when we're brought in to recover a project or just for advice, there are problems with communication. I see a lot of organisations that are having problems with emails being completely unmanageable, and when there's too many emails received per day, as you'll be aware, that information gets lost. So it's important to realise that the contract states that, is it 13.1 that says that the collaborative information needs to be...
So 13.1 in writing, 13.2, if the scope identifies collaboration software, that is the only means of communicating.
Yeah, so that will definitely make things more simple. So I worked in an organisation and we counted how many different streams of communication that they had, and there were 13. So there was just information being lost left, right and centre. It was making things very difficult. It's difficult to understand whether version history of documents, because they're being saved in different places, and yeah, that comes under document management, but also communication. So it's important to set expectations. How do you want to be communicated to? When does that communication need to happen? Who needs to be involved? Back-to-back Teams calls are another aspect of communication that we hear a lot about, and it is definitely something that organisations are trying to learn to deal with post-COVID, with the hybrid kind of working, and it's important to look at how we can get around that by setting expectations. Who needs to be involved in meetings? How do people decline? Are people, what's the consequence if somebody declines a meeting invitation? Remembering if they experience a negative response, that perhaps is a punishing consequence and they won't do it again. So it's important to think about consequences when we are trying to deal with these things. But holding each other accountable to the expectations that you've set is really important. There's no point setting expectations of, we're going to communicate between the hours of 8 AM and 6 PM and bombarding each other overnight with loads of emails because you've been in Teams calls all day. It's important to hold each other to those expectations. And again, nothing changes if nothing changes. I hear so many people moaning about emails and that they're just completely unmanageable. They're included in email chains that reply to all, but nobody does anything about it. Dad mentioned a point about email ping pong, and it's a really good point to, if you're backwards and forwards with somebody in an email, to pick up the phone or to go and see them, to just disrupt that chain and change that behaviour. And 13.1 requires everything to be in writing, but you could do a soft landing, deliver this face-to-face or over the phone to protect that relationship, to build those relationships so that we can think about the sustainability of this communication.
The other thing post-COVID is the face-to-face dialogue. Contract says everything in writing, but sitting and talking to someone rather than down to, working together to review a draft submission for a program, design document, forecast, means that you start to understand the other person's position and aids in communication. So when I started my journey on NEC, I was commercial manager of a framework between 150 and 300 million pounds of design and build contracts. No training, no copies of the contract. And in 2002, if you were fortunate enough to have access to Google and typed in NEC, it came up with the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham. My 3 contractors would carry out, this was an option C contract, target cost. Whether they were working on option A lump sum, option C or E, would have their own internal meetings called cost value reconciliation meetings. But the contract on options C to F, where the client is paying an element of actual costs or paying some of them subject to a pay and gain arrangement, requires the project manager and the contractor to sit down and at the interval stated in the contract data, which is normally monthly, so once a month, the project manager and the contractor to sit down and collaboratively review a forecast. Now, this element on the framework, worth in the end 350 million, meant that I spent 2 days a month reviewing, warts and all, contract progress with the contractor's directors and their delivery teams. It gave me an insight into contracts where forecasts were varying widely, so that meant the team didn't have hold of the budget or the program. It gave me an insight into the pinch points, which projects needed support with perhaps forensic planners or needed estimating skills, estimators to try and help them break out a backlog of unagreed compensation events. So this is a remarkably collaborative clause, but tends to be dumbed down. We end up firing reports from one project controller to another, whereas actually the PM needs to make time in their diary to sit down, review the program, resources, and actual costs. And if I can do it on a £350 million program on a monthly basis for 2 days a month, you can do it on an individual contract and it will pay dividends.
So I think that point around setting the time aside is really important. Communicating when that's going to happen, how that's going to be communicated is really important. And I think also it's a good opportunity to get some feedback on this consultation period, to sit down and discuss what's worked well, what could be improved, and how that can be implemented. And that will also strengthen that relationship to improve that going forward.
And it means when we have CEs or early warnings that the project manager can actually sit in, add value because they know about the economic pinch points on their contract.
So some contractors use early warning provisions as a better late than never, to say that they're going to be notifying a compensation event that they're going to need more time or money. Notifying an early warning, it should be a proactive risk mitigation before the risk occurs, so that both parties can work together to mitigate the risk. So it's important to come at it from that perspective.
So the early warning process is the jewel in the crown of the NEC. All early warnings have to be notified, so that means an individual communication per notice. That's because these are an important element of risk mitigation. We have a 2-speed system. Either the contractor or the project manager can instruct the other to attend an urgent early warning meeting. By agreement, they can bring a friend, could be the client, could be a subcontractor, if their presence at the meeting will help mitigate the risk before it occurs. So early warnings are notified about matters that could increase cost, impair the performance of the works quality, or delay completion or a key date. 15.3. At the early warning meeting, those present seek solutions, decide on actions, and who will take them. So at the early warning meeting, it's anticipated that the PM and the contractor may change the scope to mitigate a risk for the benefit of the contract. The early warning process begins pre-award. The client in contract data part 1 identifies risks that it wishes to go onto the first early warning register, as does the contractor. The first early warning register is produced by the PM within a week of the contract date and instructs the contractor to attend the first early warning meeting within 2 weeks of the contract date. So now under 15.4, the PM revises the early warning register within a week of the meeting. And if we came up with a mitigation proposal that requires a change in scope, then the PM issues an instruction to change the scope and notifies a compensation event at the same time of publishing the revised early warning register. Now, early warnings and CEs are separate, but there are consequences. Clause 61.5, if the PM issues an instruction to provide a quotation stating the contractor failed to notify an early warning that an experienced contractor could have, then 63.7 means that evaluation is reduced as if the early warning had been given. So the contractor gets less time or money because they didn't mitigate the risk. And on options C to F, this position, commercial position for the contractor, can be worsened even further because we can end up with disallowed cost. Failure to notify an early warning can result in costs in your options C to F contracts being struck out. Next one, B.
Okay, so thinking about behaviours that influence leadership. So we discussed that the environment is the room, the people in it. It might be a virtual environment if you're working hybrid, but this is the current environment. Leaders create, adapt and maintain the local environment. So creating the environment is all about understanding what those goals look like and what the environment needs to be to support those goals, potential obstacles that might happen, and how you can create the environment where those obstacles will be mitigated. Adapting the environment comes with measuring those behaviours. When you know what's actually happening, when you know what the trends are, when you've got feedback, you can then make changes. And maintaining the environment is all about the consequences, making sure that there are sufficient consequences to maintain the behaviours that we want to see. Simple messaging is very important for leaders to be able to create, adapt and maintain a suitable environment for collaboration. Asking, is this best for project, is a really simple way to keep people focused and to keep people aligned to whatever that shared goal is, especially if you've already discussed whatever that shared goal is, and perhaps that is something that is repeated consistently. Dudley Wood famously had said, "I want you to create a safe place to work. I don't care how much it costs." And he said this when he was the global construction manager at Bechtel, and he would be going around sites giving this message because it was really important, especially with safety, to give that very clear message. Anytime that you are giving a message and then diluting it with budget concerns or something else that's perhaps being perceived to be more important, it dilutes that message that safety is the number one priority.
On construction frameworks, we can use X20 KPIs or the alliance contract to reward appropriate behaviours. Those are two really good methods in NEC4.
The NEC suggests that leaders should be visible and committed to the new collaborative way of working. And this, again, is a really nice example of something that's kind of a best endeavour, but it's important to define what visible leadership should look like. What do you want it to look like? What does your partner organisation want it to look like? Part of a problem in this industry especially is that people are promoted into leadership positions because they are technically skilled and they're good at their job. And then if they've not had any leadership training, then that can mean that they are doing their best endeavours. They're trying their best without a clear framework of what leadership should look like, what being visible should look like. So if you give somebody an instruction to go and be visible, you need to think about what the consequence to that is, what's going to happen. So if you send somebody out to go and be visible, they show up on site and somebody might think he's being very grateful. but there's different ways that somebody's actions can be perceived. So it's really important to set expectations, training people in interpersonal skills, in behavioural leadership, so that they can understand what they need to do, what is expected of them, how they can get some feedback, even how to ask open questions. This is not something that comes naturally to a lot of people and would benefit from some kind of training.
So, how do we stop things going wrong? W2, dispute avoidance. At the end of my 3 years on my 3-year framework, I became commercial manager and had to fix the Southern Framework's £40 million unagreed compensation events. The leadership teams from the contractor and the PM wouldn't make decisions, because if you make a decision, you could be wrong. So W2. W2 is used within the UK. It has 2 stages. We may take a dispute to senior reps, directors from the client and the contractor, or we can adjudicate. I managed to solve 15 major claims or unagreed compensation events if NEC didn't have claims, which it doesn't. And you'd make a paper submission, submit it to the directors, they'd come back and tell you what to do. So clear direction to construction teams before they become polarized means that they focus their efforts on delivery instead of sending barrages of emails. A really good indication of a polarized site is when you're getting 15 or 60 emails fired off last thing on Friday to score points rather than delivery. So using the dispute process to escalate matters to the senior reps shouldn't be seen as negative. Over to you, B.
So this point fits in quite nicely with that relationships are key. It's impossible to have a collaborative workplace, collaborative environment, collaborative contracting without strong relationships. And this doesn't mean that you need to be best friends, but it means that you need to communicate, you need to treat each other with respect. So defining what that actually looks like for those specific behaviours. But doing what you say you're going to do is a pretty good place to start. Even things like starting meetings on time. In a culture where people are back-to-back meetings and people are showing up to meetings late, it's not very good for building trust. So it's important to work on those relationships to make sure that you've got the foundations for a collaborative approach. So to recap on that, relationships are important for everything that we've discussed. Setting expectations in a very clear way and taking away any kind of guesswork or common sense approach. Training leaders and future leaders is really important to be able to develop a culture where there is a psychologically safe environment, where people are coaching each other, and that's going to be beneficial for collaboration, but also just the success of any organisation. Encouraging accountability, it comes under the consequences. Consequences are the strongest driver of behaviour. So I mentioned that we have prompts and consequences. The consequences are going to be the strongest driver of that behaviour. So having things baked into the environment so that nice things happen when you succeed, and whether it's just a conversation or there's something happens when people don't do what they say they're going to do, that's really important.
And 10.1, following the contract. Under the contract, if the PM or the contractor don't follow the rules, they lose. There are clear mechanisms to disadvantage the commercial position of the client if the PM doesn't follow the rules, and clear mechanisms to disadvantage the contractor if it doesn't follow the rules. Sorry,
Okay.
V.
Okay, thank you for that addition. Did give you a little spoiler alert there to my reading list. So there are 2 books written by Howard Lees. Howard founded Holland over 20 years ago and has written several books on behavioural leadership. They are very small, short, snappy books that they give you they cover all of the behavioural basics in more detail than I have covered today. So that's a really good place to have a look. Aubrey Daniels' Other People's Habits is one of my favourite books I've read since being in this role. Aubrey Daniels has got loads of behavioural books. Some of them are a little bit more like textbooks. but other people's habits is a great place to start. There's a lot of advice in there, things that you can take away to influence somebody at home, but perhaps children or a partner that you want to get them to behave in a different kind of way, but definitely things that you can use to influence people at work. And some more from you, Dad?
Yep, so if you're going to use NEC contracts, they're written in plain English, but they require a little bit of work. So if you work in pre-contract, you need volume 2, preparing an engineering and construction contract. Post-contract, you need volume 4, managing an engineering and construction contract. If you're going to pick up the NEC contracts and start to use them, you need to do a basic introductory course, and then depending whether you're working pre or post-contract, you can attend the Getting It Right courses, and the gold standard, whether you're the PM or the supervisor, is the accreditation courses. So that's it, B.
So we've now got question and answers. I think a few people have put their hands up, so I don't know whether that's... I can't actually see any of the questions, so...
No, so for
That's
Hans, you want
okay.
to
I
give him the
can.
questions?
Yeah, sure. I would ask for those who have raised their hands to just type the questions in the box. I think that would be a more easier way to go through the questions. But we've got some here already. This is for both Bryony and John. What are your views on project charters?
They embrace, like you do with the KPIs, the aims and goals, but really they should be expanded into the contract. KPIs rewarding positive behavior is a great way to manage a contract or a program. But the problem I have with your charters are, whereas KPIs would be adjusted probably annually as we go through the different phases of the project, then you're stuck with your project charter at the beginning. Whereas KPIs provide positive rewards, so bonuses if we do things well, and also can be used to change different behaviors as a project team and a project matures.
Yeah, and I would just add that a project charter, you know, there are big good project charters and bad project charters, but I think it's important to come. I mean, if we think about this from a behavioural perspective, which is what I'm here to do, then we need to be thinking about what behaviours have been listed in there. Have they been detailed in a way that is understandable to everybody? Have we got a shared understanding? Is there any ambiguity, and how can we get rid of that?
Great, thank you. The next question we've got here. Hi, John. Was the challenge on 10.2 the only issue in the Van Ord case, or was there a bigger issue for which 10.2 could be quoted?
Van Ord, to quote my mentor Patrick Waterhouse, is the case that keeps giving to lawyers, and it keeps going through various iterations in the courts. So 10.2 is one part of it. There are lots of other different issues, and as it's gone through the Court of Appeal and the different courts in Scotland, the particular panels of judges have taken different perspectives and points of view. It's just one of many. The first court case on 10.2 that embraced that mutual trust and cooperation is a legally enforceable obligation on the PM or the supervisor was HS1. HS1 is completely different from HS2 in that it finished ahead of time and below budget. But Bechtel were acting as project manager and were incentivized on project costs. Start off in leafy Kent, putting your train line in, easy access, terrific dry ground conditions. They probably predicted mega profits back to the States. As you start to get into the Medway, difficult getting access, Thames Estuary, a nightmare to construct, and then you start to work on the north bank of the Thames, trying to get access, costs were going through the roof. The PM then started to brief the staff on how to unfairly administer disallowed costs. Costains took the PM, not the client, to court to get an injunction to stop the PM behaving in breach of mutual trust and cooperation. They didn't get an injunction or the PM would have gone off to prison, but they were fast-tracked to the Construction and Technology Court that started to tell us mutual trust and cooperation is a legal obligation, particularly on the PM and the supervisor, to apply the provisions impartially, whether they are an employee of the client or not.
Thanks. The next question here, is there an obligation on the PM to demonstrate professional skepticism?
That would seem almost a breach of mutual trust and cooperation in that you are being partisan with your decisions. If you're a good PM, and I'm going to use a nice northern saying to you, you end up as the jam in the sandwich. Both the client and the contractor are unhappy with you and squeezing your position at the same time. That means you are doing your independent job.
This one, how can you manage successful relationships whilst also implementing consequences and accountability without causing friction?
Wow, that is a big question. I think having doing the groundwork of building trust in relationships, which I appreciate is also a big thing. That's not something that's simple and easy to do. This is something that happens over a long period of time, building those relationships. Consequences, it's interesting that because I'm talking about consequences from a behavioural perspective, consequences are used, it's a lay description, which automatically it's a little bit of a loaded description. People have got an emotional attachment to the word consequence, and we automatically assume that a consequence it's got some kind of negative effect, and that's not what I mean by consequences. It's just something that happens after the behaviour. And accountability, again, it doesn't need to be a screaming, shouting, detrimental to relationships. Part of building a good feedback loop, it's something that takes practice, it takes skill, it takes training, but I think it's not something that's impossible.
So the worst contract I've worked on, contractor lost 50 million on a 75 million pound contract. Over those 4 years, we managed to maintain reasonable interpersonal relationships, talk to people open and honestly, and have a relatively friendly time. And if you can do it in that environment when the contract and the losses are stacked against you, you can do it anywhere.
We are getting close to the end of the webinar, so just maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So we've got one here. As a leader, sorry, let's just scroll down a bit. As a leader, is there any advice or clause I can use to motivate my team member who is underperforming?
I mean, I won't tell you any clauses, I'll leave that to my dad. But from a behavioural perspective, it's important to understand whether that person knows what they are supposed to be doing. Obviously, I'm giving some pretty generic advice here without knowing the specific circumstances. There's a great book called Why Employees Don't Do What They're Supposed to Do. So something along those lines. It's on my bookshelf. Why employees don't do what they're supposed to do and what to do about it. That's a good place to look. But the long and short of it is check that they know what they're supposed to be doing, check that there's any obstacles have been removed and that they've been supported with that. Having some open conversations with that person and building a relationship to a point where they can be honest with you will probably help to understand what the problem is.
When we started our NEC journey, my performance and the team, both the contractors and ours as the client reps, was probably under today's lens viewed as not very good. But we've not had any training, no copies of the contract. You've got to set off to succeed, which really means you need the guidance notes, you need to do the introductions, you need to explain how the contract should work and provide collaboration software to help the teams. And then if things are not going right, as a manager, you need to go in and support them. Not poke them in the eye and explain why things have gone wrong. Provide mechanisms to support them to succeed.
Hey, thank
So
you
I've
very much.
changed, sorry, Fan, shall I just change the slide to your last slide?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just I guess to wrap up, thank you guys so much for joining. We do have a few upcoming events. The NEC annual conference will be just a few weeks away now, Monday, 16th of June, and we've got the last few tickets left. So if anyone doesn't have any yet, please do join. There's a lot of great talks we've got planned, panel discussions, and an amazing opportunity to network with industry peers, and also other upcoming free webinars to come up. The latest one on the 23rd of June. This will be all about the environment, insurance, and risk. So any insurers yeah, it'll be very good to join. Both can be found on the events page of the website, the link to which is being shared now on the resources tab. Thank you so much to John and Bryony for taking part and hosting a very informative and wonderful webinar. The recording will be available live, as well as maybe the slides also on the past events page on the website. So yeah, thank you very much, guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later. Bye.